So today we are going to do the mother of two nations. That is Rebecca. Rebecca. So Rebecca spans so many chapters: Genesis 24, 25, 26, 27, and a little portion of 28 as well. It's not possible for us to read all these passages, so I just picked up a few of them which I will read, which pertains to our text today. So I'm looking at Genesis 24 verses 1 to 4 initially. Now Abraham was old, well advanced in age, and the Lord had blessed Abraham in all things. So Abraham said to the oldest of his house, who ruled over all that he had. So Abraham said to the oldest servant of his house, who ruled over all that he had, "Please put your hand up under my thigh, and I will make you swear by the Lord, the God of heaven and the God of earth, that you will not take a wife for my son from the daughters of the Canaanites, among whom I dwell, but you shall go to my country and to my family and take a wife for my son Isaac." Genesis 24, 6 and 7. But Abraham said to him, "Beware that you do not take my son back there. The Lord God of heaven, who took me from my father's house and from the land of my family, and who spoke to me and swore to me, saying, 'To your descendants I give this land,' he will send his angel before you, and you shall take a wife for my son from there." Now go on to Genesis 24, verses 10 to 16, the first part. Then the servant took 10 of his master's camels and departed, for all his master's goods were in his hand. And he arose and went to Mesopotamia, to the city of Nahor, and he made his camels kneel outside the city by a well of water at evening time, the time when women go out to draw water. Then he said, "O Lord God of my master Abraham, please give me success this day and show kindness to my master Abraham. Behold, here I stand by the well of water, and the daughters of men of the city are coming out to draw water. Now let it be that the young woman to whom I say, 'Please let down your pitcher that I may drink,' and she says, 'Drink, and I will also give you your camels a drink,' let her be the one you have appointed for your master Isaac. And by this I will know that you have shown kindness to my master." And it happened, before he had finished speaking, that means while he was still praying, that behold, Rebekah, who was born to Bethuel, son of Milcah, the wife of Nahor, Abraham's brother, came out with a pitcher on her shoulder. Now the young woman was very beautiful to behold, a virgin, no man had known her. Go to Genesis 24, verses 66 to 67. And the servant told Isaac all the things that he had done. Then Isaac brought her into his mother Sarah's tent, and he took Rebekah, and she became his wife, and he loved her. So Isaac was comforted after his mother's death. Now Rebekah was a woman chosen by God to fulfill a very important purpose. She was the wife of Isaac and the mother of Jacob and Esau. Her son Jacob was the father of the nation of Israel, while Esau's descendants were the Edomites. Rebekah was the only matriarch, the only woman who in her lifetime had the opportunity to relate to three patriarchs, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. The Bible describes her as a very godly woman who had her strengths, but also her human weaknesses. Rebekah is first mentioned in the genealogy of the descendants of Nahor, Abraham's brother, in Genesis 22, verses 20 to 24. But Rebekah's real story begins in Genesis 24. Sarah had died, and Abraham was getting on in years. And like any responsible father, he was keen to put things in order before he died. And one of the things he was concerned with was the marriage of his son Isaac. Isaac needed a wife, but not just any wife. Abraham wanted Isaac to have a wife, to marry a woman from his country and from his family, and not from the land of Canaan, because where he lived, because Canaan was full of idolatry. The Canaanites were pagan people. And Abraham was also adamant that Isaac should not go back to his country, as God had called him, Abraham, out of it into the land of Canaan, and had promised Abraham that his descendants, that means through Isaac, would inherit the land of Canaan. So Isaac, what did he do? He sent his oldest and most trusted servant, Genesis 24:2, back to his brother's family to seek a wife for Isaac. His brother Nahor had a son, Bethuel, who had a daughter named Rebekah. Genesis 22, verses 20 to 23. And a son named Laban. Genesis 24, verses 29. The servant prayed to God to help him discern the right girl for his master's son. Before he could finish his prayer, he saw Rebekah coming to the well to get water for her animals. She was described as a young woman, very beautiful to behold, a virgin no man had known. Her purity was something noticeable. Often in wealthy and royal families, the virgin daughters were given garments that distinguished them from others. And you can read about this in 2 Samuel 13:18, where Tamar, the daughter of David, had a special multicolored coat. Widows and harlots had clothes that designated their status too. In Genesis 38:14 to 15, you will read that about Tamar, Judah's daughter-in-law. But Rebekah was naturally beautiful. She didn't need special garments. Her inward character was reflected in her outward appearance. So the servant stopped her and asked her for a drink of water. She did not know him, yet she was ready to help him. Genesis 24:18. She drew water not only for the servant, but also for his camels. Supplying water for thirsty camels demanded hard work, but she did it. Now it's said that camels can drink something like 30 gallons of water in a few minutes. And Abraham's servant had 10 camels, while Rebekah had only a jar that she carried on her shoulder. But Rebekah ran quickly back and forth to the well and drew water for the 10 camels. She did not stop until all of his camels were watered. Now, in some texts, some texts say that these wells were a little deep. They had steps going down, and at the bottom of the well was a spring. So people had to go down into the well and draw water. We do not know what type of well was this that Rebekah was drawing water from, but apparently she did a lot of hard work and went up and down drawing water for the 10 camels. So what can we infer about Rebekah from this incident? Number one, she was hardworking. Number two, she was kind and compassionate. She was ready to serve. Even though she did not know Abraham's servant, she was ready to serve. And she was humble. Though she came from a good family, she forgot who she was, and she was ready to serve Abraham's servant, a stranger whom she did not know. These were some of her characteristics. And the servant was impressed. Abraham's servant was impressed by her. And he inquired from Rebekah whether it was possible. He inquired from her who she was. He was watching her, and he inquired, he was convinced that she was the woman that God wanted for his master's son, Isaac. So he asked her who she was, and it turned out that she was the daughter of Bethuel, the son of Abraham's brother Nahor. So he gave her a nose ring and 2 gold bracelets. And the servant inquired from Rebekah whether it was possible for him to lodge within her family's house for the night. Rebekah assured him that there was enough room in her parents' house to accommodate him and his camels. She ran ahead to let her family know what had happened. There was no hesitancy on her part to be hospitable. She was probably aware of her family's ability and hospitality to put people up in their home. On hearing her story, her brother Laban ran out to meet the man and warmly welcomed him into the house. Food was prepared and brought to him, but Abraham's servant refused to eat until he had told them why he had come. He explained to them how God had led him. He explained to them how he had prayed to the God of Abraham and how he had encountered Rebekah. And Rebekah's father Bethuel and her brother Laban were impressed, and they agreed that it was the Lord who had directed him. And they agreed that Rebekah should go with him. So the next morning, the servant got ready to leave. But the mother and brother said, let Rebekah stay with us for 10 days and then she can leave. But he said, no, I must go back. He wanted to go back because God had directed, God's hand was on this matter and God had directed him, and he wanted to return back to his master as soon as possible. Rebekah was consulted. She had the final decision to make. And seeing all this, how God had led Abraham's servant, she agreed to go. Her discernment led her to make the right choice. That's in Genesis 24, verses 47 to 60. Rebekah, you must realize, was not looking for a husband, as far as we know. She was just doing her daily tasks when suddenly God arranged a marriage for her. God is able to provide life partners in unexpected and quick ways when his timing is right. I'll repeat that again. She was not just doing her daily tasks when suddenly God arranged a marriage for her. She was not looking for a husband, but God is able to provide life partners in unexpected and quick ways when his timing is right. According to the culture of the day, Rebekah's initial acceptance of the nose ring, Genesis 24:47, was a clear sign of the servant's intention and her acceptance of it. So the family blessed her and sent her on her way with her maids. After the long trip back from Mesopotamia, they had to travel some 500 miles by camel. The party came near to where Isaac was staying in the Negev. Isaac was out in the field meditating, and he saw camels coming in the distance. When the party arrived, Isaac was told about all that happened, and Isaac took Rebekah into Sarah's tent and she became his wife. Rebekah's coming was the first thing that gave him comfort. When you look at this love story, you see that, how God arranged it. It was an arranged marriage between two individuals who didn't know each other. Rebekah gave her consent to marry a man she had never met before. and so did Isaac. And it's stated very simply in the Bible that Isaac took her into his mother Sarah's tent and she became his wife. There was nothing elaborate spoken about it, nothing, to show that this was an important marriage from the point of God's view, from God's viewpoint. This was an important marriage because through Isaac, the descendants would be given the land of Canaan. But it's stated very simply in the Bible that she became his wife. When Isaac married Rebekah, you must know that he was 40 years old. Genesis 25:19 to 21 says that. A relatively late age for a man during the biblical period to enter into his first marriage. The norm was to marry as teenagers, the early teens for women and the late teens for men. The expression of wife of one's youth, quoted in Proverbs 5:18 and in Malachi 2 verses 14 and 15, in which the term youth is used, primarily denotes the teenage years. In early Jewish practices, a man usually got married around the age of 18. But Isaac got married at the age of 40. So from this, we can deduce, from this example of Isaac, we can deduce that it is most important to marry the right person in God's timing than to get married hurriedly and early. It's most important, especially when we find ourselves like Isaac, surrounded by a pagan culture. After marriage, they enjoyed their marriage for 20 years, but Rebekah was barren. So what did Isaac do? Let's read about it in Genesis 25, verses 21 to 28. Now Isaac pleaded with the Lord for his wife because she was barren, and the Lord granted his plea, and Rebekah, his wife, conceived. But the children struggled within her, and she said, "If all is well, why am I like this?" So she went to inquire of the Lord. You can see what a godly woman she is. She didn't sit back. She didn't complain. She didn't, speak about it. She just went directly to the Lord and inquired about it. And the Lord said to her in verse 23, "Two nations are in your womb. Two peoples shall be separated from your body. One people shall be stronger than the other, and the older shall serve the younger." So when her days were fulfilled, for her to give birth, indeed there were twins in her womb, and the first came out red. He was like a hairy garment all over. So they called his name Esau. Afterward, his brother came out, and his hand took hold of Esau's heel. So his name was called Jacob. Isaac was 60 years old when she bore him. So the boys grew, and Esau was a skillful hunter, a man of the field, but Jacob was a mild man dwelling in tents. And Isaac loved Esau because he ate of his game, but Rebekah loved Jacob. The fact that Esau came out red probably was a story told far and wide, because Esau came to be known by a new name, which is Edom, meaning red. When the boys grew, Jacob bought Esau's birthright, which Esau sold freely for a bowl of red stew. Esau did not value his birthright very highly, and Jacob did not value his relationship with his brother. Favoritism between the brothers brought sibling rivalry and a competitive spirit into the family. So there was never any rest in this family. This family was so dysfunctional. They were so dysfunctional. And yet they are put into the Bible for our examples to follow. Now, when Isaac was on his deathbed, one day Rebekah overheard him telling Esau to go out hunting and prepare a feast out of his killings and bring it to him so that he could have his last good meal and give him his blessing or his birthright. When she heard this from the other room, she got really anxious. God had given her a promise that he was going to bless her favorite son, Jacob. And in the natural, it looked like God was running out of time or that he had forgotten his promise. So Rebekah decided to help God instead of trusting him. She grabbed Jacob and basically gave him a new inheritance. She passed down her ability to deceive. Without using words, she taught him how not to trust God, but how to work out his God-given promise. She went into a great detail about how to make his arms hairy, feel hairy like his brothers, and how to trick his father with his favorite crockpot meal, which she was going to prepare just the way Isaac liked it. The result was that Jacob got the blessing of the firstborn instead of Esau. And when Esau heard about it, he hated his brother Jacob. The enmity continued between the brothers to such an extent that Esau planned to kill Jacob, and Isaac had to send Jacob away to Laban's house with an excuse to find a wife for himself. Rebekah never got to see her favorite son again. So from Rebekah's story started with her being a benefit to her husband. She was a comfort to husband. Their first 20 years together, they did not have children, but they had love for one another. It's said that Isaac loved Rebekah, and Isaac prayed on her behalf that she would be able to conceive a child. And Isaac was a physical, supporting, and emotional, spiritual father to the family and a good husband to Rebekah. It ended with Rebekah taking advantage of Isaac's age and his deteriorating eyesight and health to elevate her favorite son, Jacob. We are not told of her death. She nearly jeopardized the promise of God to Jacob. Jacob's descendants were to inherit the land of Canaan. And there was Esau wanting to kill Jacob. God's plan would have been destroyed, but God is sovereign. Despite all the intrigue and deception, God still overruled, and God worked out his plans, and God fulfilled his promise to Rebekah, and Jacob became the father of the Israel nation, while Esau gave rise to the Edomites. God is not to be thwarted. God will fulfill his plans. God will fulfill all his promises, whether they are made yesterday or today or in future. He is a God who keeps his promises. So what can we take away from Rebekah that we might do better ourselves? Point number 1, Genesis 24 tells us that Rebekah was a godly woman, something of great worth in God's sight. If you look at 1 Peter 3 verses 3 and 4, it says this: do not let your adornment be merely outward, arranging the hair, wearing gold, or putting on fine apparel. Rather, let it be the hidden person of the heart, with the incorruptible beauty of a gentle and quiet spirit, which is very precious in the sight of God. As a woman Let the word of God dwell in you richly. This is the secret to a fulfilled life that so many women have missed. The godliness in Rebecca is what opened the door to her destiny. She was not sitting there complaining about her situation, but rather allowed the love of God to shape her life and to flow out through her. Point number 2. Genesis 24 again. Rebecca was not looking for a husband, as we know. She was just doing her daily tasks. But very suddenly, God arranged a marriage for her. And God is able to provide life partners in unexpected and quick ways when his timing is right. Point number 3, Genesis 24:15 to 20. Servanthood is not just doing what we are asked to do. It is going beyond what we are asked to do, to serve in ways that may be difficult, that may take up some of our time, that may take up some effort. But we should be ready to serve. Like Rebecca, we should be ready to serve at any time. Point number 4, Genesis 24 again. There are many decisions in life that you and me are going to have to make. Making the right one is vital. That's like Rebecca. She made the right choice. She made the right decision to accompany Abraham's servant back to marry Isaac. The closer you get to God, the better the chance you have of making the right choice, like Rebecca did. Point number 5, when we know God is calling us to do something, we should do it without delay, if we can. Point number 6, Genesis 25, verse 21. Children are gifts from God, given at his discretion and in his timing. They're gifts of God. Whether they are given to us by natural birth, whether they are given to us by adoption, they are given to us. They're gifts from God. And it's our responsibility as mothers to bring them into all that God has for them. On this one side note, I just want to tell you a little incident that happened about 2 weeks back. A believer lady was recounting to me about her sister, how she had adopted a boy, and this boy was giving her a lot of trouble, and still is. He's now grown to around 15 years, and he's very hyper, cannot study. They employed a tutor to teach him. He cannot remember. And she said that perhaps that the mother, when she was carrying him, was drinking, and he was probably a prostitute, and she was drinking, and probably this has affected the child. And now that he's adopted, after several years, the couple had their own child, their own son. And so she said her sister sometimes is so frustrated with this boy, looking at him, whereas her own biological son is so good, so intelligent, so obedient, whereas this child is so disobedient and so hyper. And I was listening to the story and the tales she was telling me about this boy. And then suddenly this thought struck me. Children are gifts from God. They're gifts from God. And I told her, I said, whether he's a biological child or he's an adopted child, in fact, she has more of a responsibility to her adopted son than she has to her biological son, because God has removed him from an ungodly family and put him into a godly environment, a godly family, for a purpose. He has a purpose in life. And it's her responsibility to bring him, in spite of his background, into all that God has for him. Whereas a younger son, having her genes and the husband's genes and flowing in with the family will be more likely to be adapted to her environment, to his environment, and to his upbringing. But it is her responsibility. And she was very quiet and she understood what I said. She was a new believer and she understood what I said. I said, you tell your sister, if I get a chance to speak to her, I certainly will. But children are gifts from God, whether, however we get them into our home, they are gifts, and it's our responsibility to bring them into all that God has for them. Point number 7, Genesis 25 and verses 28. When parents have one favorite child, when they favor one child over the other, nothing good will come out of it. It promotes jealousy, it promotes rivalry, it promotes a competitive spirit between the kids, and it brings disharmony in the family. Point number 8, Genesis 27. God had already promised to make Jacob more important than Esau. Rebecca manipulated it to make it happen. And though she got her wish, she created strife between her sons to the point where one wanted to kill the other. She never got to see her favored son again. This is another instance of using sinful means to try to help God keep his promises. The results are never pretty. When God says he will do something, he will do it. Just wait for him. He will do it in his time. And the last point in Genesis 28. Notice again how easily Rebecca influenced her husband to send Jacob away. We really do influence our husbands so much, so we must be careful. We also influence our sons and our children to do the wrong things. We are the mothers and we have to teach them to do right. Esau, by criticizing his wives in order to manipulate his father, she criticized Esau, I'm sorry, she criticized Esau and his wives in order to manipulate her husband to send Jacob away, which made Esau sinfully marry another woman. Women, we have to be careful how we influence our husbands and how we influence our children.